So we are live now.
Thank
We
you.
are live now. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I call to order the meeting of the NVTA Finance Committee for January 20th, 2022. First, we have the resolution that will enable us to conduct the meeting electronically. Since we haven't had it for a while, it's been recommended that I read it aloud. Whereas on March 12, 2020, the governor of Virginia declared a state of emergency in Virginia in response to the spread of novel coronavirus or COVID-19, a communicable disease of public health threat as so declared by the state health commissioner on February 7, 2020. And whereas Fairfax County, the locality in which the offices of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority are located, declared a local state of emergency pursuant to Section 44-146.21 of the Virginia Code by a declaration of local emergency from its Director of Emergency Management, and by a resolution of the Board of Supervisors of Fairfax County adopted on March 17, 2020, and which remains in effect. And whereas the Authority Finance Committee finds that it has a responsibility to demonstrate to the public through the committee's conduct the importance of maintaining proper physical distance from others and to avoid gathering in public where the risks of infection are highest, and to take measures that promote physical distancing in order to protect the public health and mitigate the impacts and spread of COVID-19, including, among others, conducting meetings electronically whenever possible. And whereas Section 2.2-3708.1A and 3 of the Virginia Code provides in part that any public body may meet by electronic communication means without a quorum of the public body physically assembled at one location when the governor has declared a state of emergency or the locality in which the public body is located has declared a local state of emergency, provided that 1, the catastrophic nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, and 2, the purpose of the meeting is to provide for the continuity of operations of the public body or the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. And now therefore be it resolved that the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority Finance Committee hereby finds that meeting by electronic means is authorized because of catastrophic nature of the declared emergency makes it both impractical and unsafe for the committee to assemble in a single location on January 20th, 2022 to discuss and transact business of the committee listed on the January 20th, 2022 Finance Committee agenda. And be it further resolved that the committee hereby finds that meeting by electronic means is authorized because the items on the January 20th, 2022 committee meeting agenda involve the discharge of the lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the authority and the committee, and also provide for the continuity of operations of the authority and the committee.
Second.
It's been motioned and second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. And I want to say thank you to staff for pulling everything together so that we can have this electronic meeting. Mr. Longe, I understand you have a special presentation at this point.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have, as you know, Dev Sin has not been able to join us for a meeting for a while, and we wanted to show you the project that she has been working on and its current state of completion. We look forward to having her rejoin us, I think in the beginning of February or mid part of February when she's back from maternity leave. And would like to introduce, and I hopefully am going to pronounce this correctly, Vedant, her and her husband's son, first child. So.
Beautiful project. Thank you.
So cute. Look at his little hat. It's adorable.
Looks like Dad.
Wonderful. Okay.
So thank you for indulging us with that.
Okay. That's wonderful. Tell her we're all thinking about her.
Will do.
Okay, next we have approval of the summary minutes of October 21st, 2021. Are there any corrections? Do we have a motion?
So move, Chair Randall.
A second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 4, Finance Committee meeting schedule. Mr. Longy.
Thank you, Mayor. The staff has put together this schedule, and I understand there's been some discussion about changing the meeting schedule. I just want to emphasize that, staff will accommodate whatever the committee desires as far as its meeting dates and times. I believe there's a discussion about moving the meeting time for the Finance Committee to the same evening as the authority meeting, which we can certainly accommodate. There may be some instances, because I like to present to the committee financial reports that are based on monthly reconciled bank accounts. So there may be some instances where the meeting occurs so early in the month that we haven't finished all those reconciliations. I would propose we would just declare those to you and, present them at the next month. With that, it's for the committee to discuss and give us the direction it chooses.
Okay, and I would also mention that the religious holidays are noted, and I don't see any conflicts or issues, but I would ask the committee if they see any. And other comments, please.
Yeah.
Chair Randall?
Thank you, Mayor Richel. Mayor Richel. I do find that the finance meeting has a harder time making sure we get a quorum. And it's been a little easier. Well, that's the wrong word. It's been a little different in COVID, because in COVID, you can have a quorum completely online or a hybrid quorum in the room and online. But because of the state of emergency order, when that order is lifted, we will go back to having to have a quorum in the room. So at least 3 people in the room. For me, it's a 4-hour commitment to do these finance meetings of a weekday. Because just driving there and driving back is a 4-hour commitment for me. So this is a very important subcommittee of MBTA, and I work really hard to not miss, and I don't miss them. But it's hard to make, and I think that's why we have such a hard time getting a quorum. Also, I've chosen to do this as my full-time job. To be chair of the council, my full-time job. For anyone that has a job as well as being the elected official, it would be even harder to make. And so I did suggest that perhaps we could look at another date. And the reason I was thinking about the day of our meetings is because the GPC meeting really is, the meetings are really significant and important while the General Assembly is in session. Otherwise, it's not as we do Ms. Backman's evaluation, but it's not one that is as critical. And usually, even while the General Assembly is in session, they often just take a half an hour. They don't even take the entire hour. So I was believing and thinking that maybe we can do if we could do the GPC meeting at 5:30. And then the finance meeting at 6 o'clock, and then the regular meeting at 7 on meeting nights. That might alleviate the problem of people not being able to get to the finance meeting. So that's my idea and my thought. But again, this is my full-time job, and so that may or may not work as well for other people.
Your thoughts are very well taken, Chair Randall. Chair McKay, do you have any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Rochelle. I agree almost 100% with what Phyllis just said. I mean, these jobs are classified as part-time, but this is the best 70-hour-a-week part-time job I've ever had. And so, I do it full-time just like Phyllis does. And I will tell you, these are incredibly difficult and becoming increasingly incredibly difficult for me to make. And so I like the idea that's been floated. I think a lot of the GPC meetings can be cut down as well. And I would just say this isn't just an issue for the elected officials and the time commitment, because it's almost as long a time commitment for me as it is for Phyllis, just given, where I live and where my office is. And, I think it's also an issue for our staff, the amount of time that our staff puts into these meetings. And I find that, they're very important, but I also find that there is quite a bit of redundancy. and there may be two efforts going on simultaneously. One is trying to schedule these before the regular commission meetings to make them more efficient, but also maybe looking at cutting down the number of meetings per year. Mr. Longy raised the issue about when they are during the month and whether or not that would work for his schedule. I would love to see, kind of what his strategic schedule looks like in terms of the things that we really need to make sure this committee discusses, and how we can work those around a new schedule that maybe, has these before our regular commission meetings, certainly in months that the GPC either isn't meeting or has a very small agenda. But maybe we can be looking at making both of the committees more efficient, sharing time between them more efficiently, both for ourselves and for staff. And so I would wholeheartedly support any effort that leads us to that more efficient use of our time and of our staff's time.
Thank you, Chair McKay. I am in complete agreement. I think we can relook at everything that needs to be looked at. What is the recommendation? Do we defer this vote until we have more resolution on when and how? What is the consensus on that? What would be appropriate to do at this point?
So when you say more resolution, do you mean I'm not sure what you mean by more resolution, because
excuse me. We have more facts on Chair McKay's comments about efficiency and but I think it's wonderful that we would meet before the NVTA meeting. I'm very conscious of how far you have to come, your other responsibilities, etc.
Mayor, I think, we don't have a meeting program for February, according to this schedule. And I know a lot of that's because of the General Assembly and some other things going on. And so what I would ideally like us to do, if we can't do it sooner, is at a minimum, have the staff rework a new schedule in cooperation with the GPC, and bring that forward to us. We could adopt it as an action item at the March 17th meeting. Would give the staff some time to kind of coordinate with GPC and find out how we can come up with a more collaborative, effective, efficient schedule that we could then adopt at the March meeting.
Okay.
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay, so we would defer this action and take it up at the March meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
Mayor Rochon, if I may, the reason there's not a February meetings listed in the originally proposed schedule is that was part of the previously adopted calendar. But certainly listening to the committee's discussion, I think we can start executing the GPC and finance meetings occurring on the same day as the authority, effective in February. I only note that because we are trying to move the budget process through. And depending upon the discussion that the committee has later in this meeting, there may be a need to have further budget discussions in February, or the committee may decide that the committee will decide whatever it decides later in this meeting. But I think we can work with the intentions that were discussed and go ahead and start moving towards that objective. Since Monica and I staff the GPC, I think we can kind of work those times when we see maybe a little bit heavier finance and a lighter GPC, just kind of shift the times around so that members aren't coming to the offices too early, and to make better use of your time, to go with what Chairman McKay had said. I think we can see that flexibility and work.
The date of the February meeting, I don't seem to have that in front of me.
It will be the authority meeting, so it'll be the second Thursday in February.
That would be the 10th.
Yes.
Okay.
The 10th.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's a fair suggestion, and in light of your points, Mr. Longy, about preparing for the upcoming budget, what are your thoughts? What's the thoughts of the committee?
February 10th, it feels like I'm fine with that. I don't think I have a budget, a scheduling conflict, but I'll check, but I'm fine with that for now.
If I could, Mayor Rachel, Chair Randall, you may have a conflict. I believe we received an email about you being unable to attend the February authority meeting. You're on mute.
I think it's a NACO. I think it's a NACO conflict, Jeff. I forgot what it was, but I think I have a NACO conflict on that day. For some.
Yeah, I seem to remember that as well.
So, hold on just a second. See if I can find it.
I mean, one thing on the February 10th, if I was hearing Mr. Longy right, February 10th would be a placeholder if it's determined it's necessary. Right now, there's no GPC meeting on my calendar for that day. And so I don't think, I think if we needed to meet that day for some reason, I don't think it's a conflict for me. And I think it could be starting pretty late since I don't see a GPC meeting on my calendar right now.
And I have no conflict.
I don't see one on my schedule, but I'm almost positive that I do. But but I don't know for sure. And even if I did, me alone won't break or make quorum. So I'll say fine for now.
Phyllis, I thought, I was just recollecting. I thought your conflict was in March at the March meeting. I could be wrong, but
I could be wrong too, because listen, this is why I don't keep my own schedule.
yeah, same.
Right here. Right. But it's fine either way. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so do we need a motion to meet February 10th, or just simple consensus would do?
I think simple consensus will do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well,
yeah.
Are we ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay, MBTA investment policy, proposed changes, Mr. Longy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to be as brief as possible on these next items. If I am too brief, please interrupt me with any questions. But I do want to get to the budget discussion. To sum up the rationale for these changes to the investment policy, when the authority adopted the 18 to 23 6-year program, it had 1.9 million expected to be programmed in 2023. We are now looking at 2023, which would start July 1st of this year, and enough projects have moved out that the amount of money waiting to be programmed that year is now up to 178 million. So $176 million shift. And basically what that means is, what that reflects is the fact that the projects are taking longer to get off the ground and get going than we had originally estimated. So what staff is looking at through these changes is to adjust our maturity periods to kind of make lemonade out of lemons. We would like the money to be going out the door, but since it isn't, extend the maturity period for certain investments as delineated in item G, 3G in the staff report, and as reflected on pages 9, 10, and 11 in the investment policy. With me today is Josephine Gilbert, who retired as Fairfax County's investment manager. And as you remember, as we were going in the transition with Dev, moving over to investment and debt manager, and then out on maternity leave, Joe has been supporting us and helped work on these policy revisions as well. With that, I'd be happy to go into detail on the revisions, but basically what we are doing is proposing to extend some maturities while at the same time reducing the percentage of holdings we can have in certain instruments. So as we take a longer maturity perspective, we reduce how much we can hold to kind of balance risk. Obviously, everything we're recommending here is compliant with the state code, as is all aspects of our investment policy.
Thank you.
And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Longy. For those who are watching who might be curious, what underpins the strength of the bonds that are backed by the banks mentioned in G4?
Actually, those are commonly known as World Bank bonds. They're specifically listed in the state code as eligible for public funds investing at a locality or political subdivision level. Interestingly enough now, many of those bonds actually come with higher credit ratings than U.S. Treasuries and agencies. And that's part of the rationale for us taking that longer time horizon. It is also very difficult to get highly rated instruments. After the last financial collapse in 07 or 08, the number of triple rated securities has gone down dramatically. And so we're finding that if we can get it and keep it longer, it's better for the portfolio.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments?
Mr. Long, I'm sorry.
I'll follow Phyllis.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lungi, as it's taking longer to get the project started and things out the door, is that also changing the cost of the projects?
Prior to the quarter of last calendar year, it wasn't very material since interest rates were so low. But as I have discussed at the RJAC meeting, where depending upon your measurement point, I think it's easy to consider that the last quarter of last calendar year had a 6% inflation rate. Were that to be an annual rate stretched over the same number of years, that $176 million moved down calendar, those dollars would be worth roughly 36% less. So we are communicating that eye opener of inflation to the project sponsors because it is going to have an impact on
Absolutely, absolutely. And you are taking and so the plan that you're putting in place right now takes into account that change that change in cost.
Yes, well, we don't upsize the amount of funding to a project based on inflation, but it is something the project sponsors will have to deal with.
And so they will be made aware of that, or they're being made aware of that. Okay.
I'm sorry, Mike. I have a part two, a follow-up to Chair Randall's question. Hearing about additional cost needs for projects isn't new for us. But usually, and we hear that often, and I have conversations with the project sponsors about their 30% or other revenue sources that are potentially available before asking additional monies of the authority, because that's a process. When you ask for additional monies for the authority, we have to go back and reevaluate and then post a new congestion reduction relative to cost score. But now looking at what's happening with inflation, let's say 50 million fully funded your project at the time the project was adopted. Now that 50 million may not fully fund your project anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so I know we always talk about and you tell the recipients to adjust for inflation, but to adjust for a 6% inflation, that's a bit of a larger adjustment and for a longer time span as well. So those are some of my concerns. But I mean, I'm not sure what else we can do though.
Chair Randall and Mayor Rochon, I'll also note, and I found that this has been helpful in discussions with project sponsors about inflation. And I'm sure I am the only one in this meeting that this applies to. But unless you were financially aware 40 years ago, dealing with 6-7% interest rate and higher is actually a fairly foreign concept for folks. Now, I'll be upfront with you. I graduated from college in 1982. So I walked right into the buzzsaw of inflation and I saw my parents dealing with it. It is a big threat kind of on many, many sectors, not just for the authorities projects, but for just a lot of factors. So I certainly will continue to be talking it up at the RJAC. I used the example of my college graduation, and I'm not a genius. I didn't graduate from college at 16 or anything like that. So, but I think we do have a number of folks who just really inflation is not on their horizon, and what it can do to projects is not on their horizon.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair McKay?
Yes, I was going to put a motion on the floor. I move the Finance Committee recommend authority approval of the proposed changes to NVTA Policy 13 investment policy.
Do we have a second?
Yep.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Longy. Duplicate payment detection audit.
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle. This staff report, there is no action item involved in this, but we do leave open for the committee to provide a directive to staff. This is a follow-on to the duplicate payment audit. That was a special agreed upon procedure audit that the Finance Committee recommended and the authority authorized in July of last year. We did submit $136 million in reimbursements. Those were contained in 131 reimbursement requests that actually had a little over 1,000 invoices involved. So the computer process that PB Mayors came up with was very effective in sorting through that. We did unfortunately find 6 duplicate payments. They were all on one project. The total dollar amount of those was $87,000. To put some of this in perspective, we don't know that those 6 are the only duplicate payments we've made. We only know that those 6 were the only duplicate payments in the test data given to the auditors. The authority has thus far reimbursed $617 million in project reimbursements. So the 136 million is roughly 22% of what we've done. We, at the very beginning, when we talked about this, said we would not be submitting all projects for this type of a test, simply because, you know, a project where we bought 4 or 6 transit buses, those are not going to be very prone to having duplicate payments on them. It's the larger, more complex projects. I will note that the project sponsor, when we brought the duplicates to their attention, they did everything that I would expect them to do. They promptly checked on their end. They did verify that a mistake had been made. They have kicked off an internal review of their processes. One of the nice things about this audit is, since you're pointing to the duplicate payments, these specific ones, the project sponsor can easily go back in and look at their processes. And that's part of the feedback loop that we intended with this. The project sponsor obviously has also agreed to return funds. Moving forward, the responsibility to not submit duplicates stays with the project sponsor. For the authority to have the internal controls in place to self-detect these, other than the great job that Peggy Teal and the planners do when you know, they review reimbursements, they have caught them in the past. Project sponsors have also self-identified them in the past. But in order for us to have that responsibility, we would have to replicate everything that the project sponsor is already doing within our general ledger system. And certainly that is not cost effective, and that's not what I think any of us want to do. So staff is presenting to you an option where we could build in this agreed upon procedure as part of our annual audit process. We would typically kick it off during summer when the auditors are not busy doing financial statement audits for us. And then also suggest that if a duplicate is discovered, the project sponsor then absorbs the cost of the audit. So let's say a dollar in duplicate payments was discovered, 50 cents from one project, 50 cents for another. Then the cost of the audit would be assigned 50% to one project sponsor, 50% to another. And if no duplicates are found, the authority absorbed the cost of the audit as a way of showing that, you know, we are being diligent with the public funds entrusted to us. And that's completely, obviously, at the authority's option. I will note the $87,000 that will be returned to the authority cost $18,000, $18,500 to find. So actually the audit cost had a 4 times return on its investment. I actually hope that we won't see it again. I mean, it'd be nice to be running these audits on an occasional basis, and we can tell the public that we're being diligent and that we don't find any duplicates. So with that, I'll be happy to respond to any questions, and the committee has a range of options, with what it can do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Longi, and I think you have framed the issue very, very well. However, for the record, I do always like to countersink the nail. So I would ask you to please restate where the NVTA responsibility ends and the responsibility of the localities begin.
Based on common practice for our type of operation and based on our MOUs and SPAs that we have with the jurisdictions and project sponsors, it is the project sponsor's responsibility to not submit duplicate payments. They are only to submit legitimate reimbursement. I'm sorry, I said payments. Only to submit legitimate reimbursement requests to us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Comments or questions? Chair McKay, you look puzzled. Do you have a question? No.
No, I'm good.
Okay. And you would like some guidance here, Mr. Longi. Is there another alternative, perhaps not every year, but maybe once every other year? What are you thinking?
My concern with once every other year is we might develop too big a workload. We have a lot of projects in the pipeline. The number of projects, their complexity, and the amount of money is just expanding. Certainly we can do every other year. We can, we don't have to charge the project sponsors. We could charge project sponsors.
Charging the sponsors, I think that focuses their attention on the problem. So, yeah, so I would say if that is to be the case, I think that's wise to do that. I would certainly favor that. What is the opinion of the committee?
No, Madam Chair, when I talked to Ms. Backman around this earlier, a couple things. One, our auditors, our staff have to like flip through pages and pages and pages to even figure out if we're being, double charged. It is up to the submitters to figure this out. Would it be helpful, Mr. Longi, if is there like a cover page on this thing so that if they're doing it, they could pick up faster? Is there anything, I guess, it's their responsibility to not do that. That's true. Absolutely true. Is there anything that we can do that would help them flag that? Any kind of anything we can put in place to help them? Because I gotta believe no one did that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it actually just creates a headache for everyone. But is it anything that they could get back, and so that when they've charged us once, it gets clicked off so it can't happen again? I don't know. It's their responsibility, but can we help them at all?
Well, we have, as we were developing PIMs, which reimbursements are running through now, and for obvious reasons, I don't want to go into too much detail. We did put some accounting protocols in there that would self-report back to the project sponsor.
Okay.
But I wouldn't call that a fail-safe solution.
Well, clearly, but yeah, but I'm not sure we can do anything more. So.
And when we have discovered duplicates, then the good side of it is a duplicate submittal contains a lot of information, oftentimes down to the staff person or staff people that have touched it. And again, I'll go back. Jurisdictions on a dollar basis, jurisdictions have discovered internally and self-reported more duplicates to us than even with this audit we have been able to uncover.
Well, and that just goes to my statement. No jurisdiction is trying to do this purposely.
I would, the cost benefit ratio on that is pretty bad if it was
Yeah.
to be done purposely.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. So, or do we favor a yearly audit and making the localities responsible for reimbursement should something turn up? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, Chair McKay is nodding yes. Chair Randall, are you in agreement? Mr. Longy, do you have the guidance that you wish?
Yes, we'll take that as a directive and then
Okay.
come forward with policy modifications. And you will see this topic in the operating budget discussion later in this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Longy. Audit service procurement and contract guidance.
This is the audit meeting, or at least the mechanics of the audit meeting. Our contract with PB Mayors is expiring, and we do need to re-up a contract. We obtain the services with PB Mayors through what's called a rider clause on other contracts. We typically do that as some examples. Our cell phone service all comes from a contract with Fairfax County Schools and AT&T. Likewise, most of our printing comes and graphic services comes from a contract rider on Fairfax County Government's print shop contract. We typically do this because it's just so much more of an efficient way of meeting the procurement requirements, while at the same time, and this is why we focus on Fairfax, we get the purchasing power of a Fairfax County versus the purchasing power of the relatively small NBTA. I propose that we do the same thing for the audit services. We can look for another Virginia contract that has suitable terms for financial statement audits. That also kind of frames the price structure, if you will. There are pros and cons on writing a contract. One of the big pros of just issuing an RFP is you may get a cost reduction. However, that cost reduction may be somewhat disguised because a new audit firm is going to have to come in and completely review and relearn our systems. PB Mayors knows those systems. That was one of the reasons they were able to do the agreed upon procedure audit so efficiently for us. Also, we are presenting in the operating budget guidance the concept of getting the authority ready to be a recipient of federal funds. That is something that we talked to PB Mayors about, and they said that if you choose to move forward with that, you're actually in very good shape. It's because Peggy Teal and I, both, while we've not managed federal funds projects, pretty much our whole careers have involved them. So we built the accounting structure to accommodate that. We just need to wrap up some policies and make some other changes. So that is something, both of those things are something that we could start doing immediately were we to do a contract rider. That, of course, any contract rider presupposes that the finance committee as the audit committee is comfortable with PB Mayors. You would not do a contract rider if you had any discomfort with the audit firm. One last note I will make on this. Previously, the Government Finance Officers Association had issued guidance that an audit firm ought to be turned over every 10 years or 15 years. We're just completing a 5-year contract. The Government Finance Officers Association, also known as GFOA, has actually changed that guidance because in the intervening time, audits have gotten so complex that it is not only expensive for a new firm to come up to speed, but things can happen while that firm is coming up to speed that potentially could go undetected. So with that, we'll follow, obviously, the direction of the committee as to whether we issue an RFP for auditing services. or if we come back with what we believe is a suitable contract rider proposition.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Chair Randall? Chair McKay?
I don't have a strong preference either way. I can be comfortable with either route. It would seem to me like writing an existing contract is a whole lot more efficient. I haven't heard anything that leads me to believe that would be problematic, but I literally am agnostic on the two paths. I just think one is a lot easier, and I don't see really justification for not using that one per se.
Thank you. I would also favor writing the contract. I think it will be less impact on MBTA staff. I think PB Maris will be able to get us up and running federal fund wise quicker than a new auditing firm. So, what are your feelings, Chair Randall? Are you?
I agree with that. I was just trying to think that we need a motion for this. And because probably Mr. McKay could make it, but I don't think we do.
There's no motion on the paper.
No motion
Mr.
on- no
Lungi,
motion on this, yeah.
would you be more comfortable with a motion?
No, I think I can take this as a directive because we will be coming back to you, obviously, for your concurrence with an actual rider recommendation. So the committee has another bite, obviously,
Okay.
of this apple.
Okay, thank you. And you have sufficient guidance. Okay, thank you. Moving on to FY23 operating budget guidance.
Thank you. I think, Margaret, for purposes of this discussion, it would be best to put the spreadsheet up that's at the end of the staff report. And as we have done in previous years, we've kind of indexed the budget note column on this spreadsheet to the staff report. And we're presenting the operating budget to you for guidance, basically in two segments: changes to the base budget and then enhancements with additional programs. So the first two columns, numeric columns, or I guess the second and third column from the left, show you the adjusted base budget for fiscal 22, the current fiscal year. That includes the additional staffing that was approved in December. That is now wrapped into that base. And then a proposed base budget for fiscal 23, which would start in July of this year. Then further over to the right, you see the proposed FY23 budget with new initiatives. Moving through these items, before I go through it, I just want to note, to save time, we're not going through the local budget, our local distribution fund budget, because as you know, that's an in and an out. We send out every dime that we get in. The regional revenue fund budget, we are still working on the revenue estimates for that. And that really works down into what is the pay-go available for the 6-year program update. So focusing on the operating budget, the first segment in there is personnel expenditures. And the main driver there is compensation changes. So we did use a 5% increase level. What we typically do is propose a number that we use as a not to exceed for the calculation purposes. Then we look and see what the jurisdictions are doing with their compensation changes. We exclude if a jurisdiction is like doing a catch-up pay plan adjustment or something like that. And then we keep our compensation changes in line with what the jurisdictions are doing. So we are proposing 5% as the initial benchmark, and then we'll look and see what the jurisdiction budgets come out with. Sorry.
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
So are you talking about the jurisdiction's budget for the fiscal year that we are in now, or for the past fiscal year, for the fiscal year that we're in now? Because we're about to go into our budget season.
Yes.
So, okay, because I don't think most counties, I think Loudoun may have been the only county last year that was able to do a budget increase for our employees for obvious reasons. I mean, it was just a hard year, and it's going to be a hard year again this year. And so I think 5% makes sense. I actually believe how you choose to do that is a good policy. But I do want you to know that, have some flexibility on that, because there will be years, just because of how the county budget is sitting, that we may not be able to give the pay increase that we believe our employees deserve.
Mhm.
And we don't want you to necessarily have to follow that practice. So,
Well, we have been, well, just for clarification, the 5% is looking forward to your FY23 deliberations. So,
well,
so we're looking to see, what the
yeah,
jurisdictions do.
okay, and the statement still stands.
Okay. And we
Statement still
we
stands.
do take an average of the jurisdictions, and we found, jurisdictions are in different places at different times. This process seems to have worked well for us thus far. We've been able to,
And I think it has. That's why I said that. But I would also just say that I know that we're going to have a tougher budget process than we have in many years in Loudoun County,
Mhm.
and and that's true for quite a few different reasons. Quite a few different reasons for our county. I know that last year Fairfax was in that same boat. I'm not sure how they're going to do this year, but I guess what I'm saying is, you know, in the fiscal years where you can see counties being able to do a compensation, great, follow that model. But you're going to find some fiscal years where you're going to look at counties and find out that we can't do compensation, even though we want to, and maybe you don't want to follow the model during those years. That's what I'm saying.
well,
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Chair McKay.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to support what Phyllis was saying. I mean, last year we did do compensation increase. It was only 1%, 2% for schools. And I would just say that, so much of what we do at the local level anymore, sadly, if you have an LCI like we have, and that Loudoun is increasingly having, so much of what you're able to do for county employees is steered by what the state is doing for school employees. And so, I do think it's good from an advisory standpoint. And I think that's what's being discussed here from an advisory standpoint. I think it's a good thing to look at. But jurisdictions, regardless of how good or bad their budget situation might be heavily influenced by availability of state matching funds to make compensation adjustments, even when it may not be ideal. And so it's a little bit of a corrupted's not the right word, but it's a little bit of a corrupted process from the standpoint of that state leverage. And so I just want to raise that. I would just say, looking forward to the next budget year, it's clear we're going to find a way to do compensation increases. I think a larger question for the budget is what we are not going to be doing is trying, at least to the extent feasible in a county of our size, not growing our staff numbers, because right now it's hard enough to fill positions as it is. And I think what we are instinctively supporting is valuing our existing employees as a higher priority than growing positions, especially in this market for hiring. So I do think that's something we should discuss relative to the budget. But I think we're going to head into this budget year with employee compensation increases and not a formal, but close to a formal attempt to freeze new position growth.
Thank you, Chair McKay. I would add also that for over the last decade, our city has not been able to provide pay increases to our employees, our staffers, what they're worth. We have been behind the curve. So I'm in agreement. Thank you.
We can, thank you for these comments. And, I would come back if we felt that we needed like a circuit breaker. Then, with these comments in mind, I would come back and make that clear to the committee.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Laundrie.
So on that, the large driver in the personnel expenditures is obviously that 5%. We also have an open season on health insurance, so employees can opt in, they can opt out, they can change their insurance coverage. And in our environment with currently 14 employees, that actually can make a fairly large difference. So we try to keep that, have some flexibility built in budget-wise with that. Moving from the personnel expenditures, and again, we're talking about the base budget, to professional services. The first item there that I want to note is the audit and accounting services. It looks a little strange that we go from 48,000 to 38,000, but what that is the agreed upon procedure audit coming out, because that was a one-time expense, and then some inflationary factor, because typically when you start a new 5-year contract, you're going to have some cost increases. So we've tried to mitigate that, even though that number is going down. The next number I'll point out there, and it's not noted in the footnotes, is the consulting services at 25,000. That is the CEO position description and compensation study, which was a one-time expense, just to explain that large difference there. If there's any no questions on that, I will move to technology and communications. The first, please.
Oh. I don't think anyone has a question. No.
The first line in technology and communications, we have a $94,000 expense, which is dropping down to 88,000. And a lot of that is, when we built the investment program, one of the things I noted was many of those services were subscription based. And as we have been in somewhat of a state of flux on staffing that, we have ended some of those subscriptions. It's not really to the detriment of the program, but until we get that staffing more consistent, basically until Dev comes back from maternity leave, it doesn't make sense to hold some of those. It didn't make sense to hold some of those subscriptions, because you don't really get the benefit of them unless you've got somebody looking at them full time. So that was just an opportunity for us to do some cost savings. I think you can look at the investment portfolio performance, and we are way outperforming our benchmarks. And it really hasn't cost us anything on the performance side. And it would probably be something that I would look to come back and reinstate maybe in fiscal 24, fiscal 25. We would tend to scale that back up. The other line in this section that draws your attention is the GIS project monitoring and management and modeling. What you're seeing there is largely the expenses for the final phase of PIMS. That again were one-time expenses. The remaining, the 32,800, really is the maintenance cost for those systems that we've installed and built in the last couple of fiscal years. That pretty much summarizes the changes to the base budget. If there aren't any, I'm sorry, one last one. How could I forget? Administrative expenses, the one line there is the lease. I have talked to the commission. As you're aware, we sublease space from the regional commission. There is still empty space on the other side of our current footprint. I talked to the building management about that, because we had looked at that previously as an offset to the more expensive space, acquiring more expensive space from the commission. And the landlord, or the building owner through his representative, basically said, yeah, it's empty, but I'm getting paid on it. So I'm not going to let you have it for cheaper than what I'm getting paid on it. And frankly, what they're getting paid on it wouldn't be equitable for us to pay. So that kind of ends up as a dead end. I have talked to Bob Lazaro and Linda Tinney, because basically if they renegotiate their lease, and now's a good time to renegotiate ours, we could potentially acquire that much cheaper space. In addition, obviously, to a overall rent reduction. They have said that, they've talked to their broker, and the broker said now is a good time to renegotiate. But basically, we can't do anything. I guess I'm summarizing it. We can't do anything with this line unless the commission were to be able to successfully renegotiate their lease. So what you're seeing there is a contract escalation. With that, it kind of sums up my adjustments to the base budget. If there is any questions on that, I'd be happy to take them before we move to the new initiatives.
Okay. Any further input for Mr. Longy? Okay, no. Thank you, Mr. Longy.
Moving to the new initiatives, we are proposing 3 positions. We would have proposed 1 or 2 positions last year. However, with the COVID uncertainty unfolding in front of us, because COVID was coming in just as the budgets were being worked on in March of 2020. We, along with I think everybody else, said now's not a good time. However, our workload has not stopped growing, but we've kind of missed a year in incremental growth to address that workload. And there's no way for us to push that workload down calendar to offset the staffing that I think responsibly did not ask for in fiscal 22. So the first position, and this goes to the personnel expenditure section, which again is the large driver. We are asking for an accounting technician position. And I have in the first bullet there the numbers that we are looking with. Previously, when we asked for positions, we tended to ask for a fairly high financial position, expecting that person to do a lot of their own routine work. Now we are at the growth stage where an accounting technician is, I think, a good fit because we have the expertise we need. We just need on the accounting and finance side more throughput processing ability. We are seeing that we are, and part of this is COVID restrictions. We are seeing that we are running late on doing some of our transactions currently. The December 30% distribution actually went out in January. We try not to do that, but we do have to have a second set of eyes looking, especially at the larger transactions, and it just takes bandwidth. I will note that the last time the finance arena got an increase in staffing was in fiscal 2019. In that time, the reimbursement requests have increased 75%, and the value of those requests have increased 72%. As the larger, more sophisticated projects start to come online or get into the pipeline is probably the better way to describe it. The reimbursement requests are just that much more complicated. So I note the salary, benefits, equipment, and furniture can be considered one-time expenses, and then we have the office space, ongoing technology charges, and then the general and admin expenses are pretty minimal. It's actually the lease is what drives that cost sector more than anything else. I'll be happy to respond to any questions on the accounting support.
Questions, comments? None.
My only question is hire who you need. That's my only question.
Well, and with that, we'll segue over to the planning side. I do want to note, as it notes in the staff report, Keith Jasper is here to talk about the 2 planning positions that we are submitting. A planner does also look at every reimbursement request. So while on the finance side, I need somebody who can throughput and process, the planning focus on a reimbursement request is looking more at the suitability of the things being submitted for reimbursement to the project that was approved by the authority. The finance side does that as well, but obviously the planners are a little bit more tuned in on those type of topics. In addition to that, the throughput process, the authority has in its 5-year strategic plan the goal to undertake modeling on a regional basis and that is built into the planning request as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Keith.
Excuse me, Mike, but Keith, before you step in, I would want to note the parameter study that hopefully will be concluding and bringing to finance within the next several meetings, where we found disparities in the billing that really came from the planning staff, and not to rehash some of the disparities, but we noticed that some of the project sponsors are not billing us for indirect labor costs, and others are at dollar for dollar. So, and these are some of the things that the planning staff caught and brought to our attention, and that's really how the parameter study was born. Okay, Keith.
Thanks, Michael, Monica, and Mayor Rochelle, members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity. It's a very rare appearance for me in front of the Finance Committee, so excuse me if I don't follow all the right protocols. But I thought it might be useful just to give a quick context about my team, the Transportation Planning and Programming team, which I guess if you think about organizational structures is somewhat equivalent to the finance team that Mike leads. I have four positions that report directly or indirectly to me, and our two primary responsibilities, as our title of the team would suggest, are transaction, which, as you know, we update on a 5-year cycle, and that takes 2 to 3 years to complete, and the authority's 6-year program, which we update on a 2-year cycle, and that takes just over a year to complete. Kind of behind all of that, and Mike has already alluded to this, is a whole slew of what I call programmatic oversight activities, which cover everything from development and execution of SPAs, standard project agreements, updates to SPAs, closeouts to SPAs, reimbursement requests, participating in technical committees on some of the projects that use regional revenues. Monthly status reporting, you see each month a very summary report that Ms. Backman includes in her CEO report to authority members. That's the basis for both flagging celebration milestones. There's ones you love, the groundbreakings and the ribbon cuttings, and maybe others that we don't like to see, but we need to catch anyway if there's issues related to project status or progress. We do a lot of internal reporting, status reporting, a lot of external liaison, which we do, but there's a lot more that we cannot do because of resource constraints. And kind of something which is somewhat kind of under the radar, which we haven't really had to deal with up until now because of the age of the authority and the number of years of its revenue stream, is but the SPAs have a requirement in them for us to monitor the projects that we funded pretty much to the end of their useful life. So closing out a SPA isn't the end of the SPA as far as my team is concerned, and we need to figure out a process where we can efficiently meet that requirement without being too burdensome on our own resources and yours. My team is also responsible for providing all staff coordinations resources for the authority's 2 statutory committees, the TAC and the PCC, as well as one of the standing committees, the Planning and Programme Committee, and an advisory committee to the CEO, the Transportation Technology Committee. And this is the team which developed and delivered for authority approval the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan last year, and also with consultant support, the development and implementation, successful implementation, I would say, of PIMS and the dashboard, which quite a number of the people who spoke at the authority organizational meeting actually gave us some praise for, which was very much appreciated. So the 2 positions we're talking about here, firstly, the modeler. This is really getting into an area which was set out in the authority's strategic plan, which was adopted back in 2017, I recall, to bring transportation modeling capabilities in-house. So this is not anything that is out of the blue. It's always been there. We're now getting to the point with the current update to transaction that actually provides us a golden opportunity to finally make this happen. And with this modeler, if approved by the authority, this will enable us to become increasingly independent of external consultant support with respect to certain modeling analyses, such as for the 6-year program with congestion reduction relative to cost, long-term benefits, transaction ratings. These are all things which really are enshrined within Virginia Code that we can only do with consultant support. So I think this position will over time yield a cost benefit to the authority by looking forward to reduced consultant expenses in the future to fulfill statutory requirements. I think in addition to that, this position will enable us to replicate all the modeling that our consultant does for transaction. We're not proposing for the foreseeable future to take over transaction and bring that entirely in-house. It's just way too big of an exercise to do that, but it would give us the ability to duplicate what the consultants do. We simply do not have that capability at the moment, which for an organization with our responsibility is frankly, as a planner, not really acceptable. We want to bring ourselves at least to the level where all 4 of our counties are with respect to their in-house modeling capabilities. Even then, we'll still probably be pretty much on the lean end of the scale. But it does give us a pathway to move forward, and the modeler, if approved for hiring, will be someone who can help us with big data analytics. We're very big on data-driven decision making, but the downside to that is you have to process the data, and we've kind of tinkered with this at the edges. You've seen some of the analysis we've produced related to travel trends from the beginning of the pandemic. It's really important to us to understand those trends going forward, to understand the impacts that the projects that you fund are having on Northern Virginia. And so this person will give us the capability to do this using tools that really pretty much we already have. We just don't have the resources to use or get the best potential from the tools that we have. The second position for a new planner will give us greater bandwidth to match the expanding workload that Mr. Longier has already spoken to, and to do some things which frankly we should be doing, but we just simply unable to do. We'd like to meet with our jurisdictions on a jurisdictional staff on perhaps 3 occasions during the year, maybe 4 at a push, where we can actually sit down across the table or virtual table to talk about project status on a jurisdiction or agency basis, but face-to-face, one-on-one. That gives us much deeper insights than we'll ever get through our standard monthly status information requests, but to actually get down into real specific details and issues. During the course of the work for transaction, we've established a bus rapid transit planning working group, which surprisingly never existed before within the greater Washington, D.C. region. We have participants including PG County, Montgomery County, the District of Columbia, as well as TPB staff and MBTC staff and DRPT and VDOT on that committee. And I think that's really important when you look at the long-term transportation needs for the region. So we're happy to take the lead on that, but it does take resources. Technology projects such as RM3P, we think there's a great need for more of such projects. The capacity to look towards federal grants and to administer federal grants in the future would be a great ability for us to go into areas that regional revenues do not currently allow us to do. We have 3 core values that were developed for transaction: safety, sustainability, and equity. We strongly feel that should be kind of integrated, kind of more organization-wide, and that's going to be a bit of a lift over the next 6 to 12 months. And we'd love to have greater visibility into the way you and your the localities use MBTA's 30% revenues. We have a very light touch on the 30% revenues because there's no great requirement for us to impose ourselves in that process with respect to how the money's spent. But I think it's nonetheless very useful for us to know how that money's being spent, because it tells a much more complete picture about what happens with MBTA's revenues. And I think there's also a great deal of deeper understanding we could provide with respect to the details of the projects that we do fund, such as lane miles, miles of trails, and other bike paid facilities that we add, and indeed dedicated or other infrastructure to support transit services. These are all things that a new planner would help us to move forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Keith. Questions, comments? Chair McKay?
Yes, just very briefly, on the planning positions, I don't have any questions on the accounting, but on the planning positions, what would be really helpful for me to see is a side-by-side that shows me what we currently have consultants do and what that cost us compared to what the cost of these new positions is, and you know what the net benefit you think is of the new positions. You know, my only concern is, and I just mentioned this earlier about what we're trying to do in the county by managing positions. You know, this is quite a few positions at one time. I know if I remember correctly, we added some positions mid-cycle not long ago, and so you know I'd like two pieces of information that would help me. One is what we spend on consultants and what these new positions would do that we don't get specifically from the consultants. I think would also be helpful for us to know what things some jurisdictions are already capable of doing, or other regional entities, because you know, planning for me is really important, but I also know that every regional organization I serve on does planning. And so I'm a little bit, you know, I'd like a little bit more clarification on what we would be doing that no one else in the region is doing. And then lastly, probably outside of the planning realm, but overall at NVTA, you know, I have not been here since day one. I've been here for several years, but I would like to see from the beginning until now where we've seen position growth and how many positions we've grown. My lingering concern is the number of positions. And that is not only based on what we're not able to do at the county level because of some budgetary constraints, but I'm also increasingly concerned about what's happening in Richmond, and you know how these positions will translate in some people's mind versus projects that are actually getting built. And so we're going to need to have some pretty good explanations on the need for these. I don't doubt that there is a need. I guess my question is whether it's now or whether it still is prudent to do some work with consultants and phase this in over a longer period of time, as opposed to acting on it all at one time. And so I don't have a position right now, but I do have really some requests for additional information that I've shared. At least it would be helpful for me as we consider this.
Thank you, Chair McKay. Chair Randall, do you have any comments or questions?
I don't. I think, well, maybe I do. You know, I think that I've been in MBTA, I guess about the same time as Jeff, maybe a little longer. I think MBTA was working kind of on a shoestring for a long time and doing the most with the least. And you know, I think when you've done that, and then all of a sudden you start asking for more positions, you probably needed them all along, but you just were not asking for them. So it feels like quite a few at one time. But that doesn't mean they haven't been needed all along. It means we've been overworking our staff. And that has been proven by some of the turnovers and some of the turnovers we almost had. And so, you know, what I always say to our staff and any staff is ask what you need. And if we have to be pared back, then let the elected officials pare you back. But ask what you need.
Thank you, Chair Randall. I would echo what Chair Randall said. Has been on a shoestring for quite some time. These positions have been needed. And I would also like to juxtapose the need for the positions versus the the economic impact, the positive economic impact that the NVTA has on the Northern Virginia region. When that study was done, it was incredibly impressive, the amount of resources and funding and economic development that has come into Northern Virginia because of the NVTA. So I would be supportive of this. I appreciate Chair McKay asking for more information because we all want to know more. Any other comments or questions, input for Mr. Longi?
Madam Chair, if I could, thank you, Chair McKay. We will definitely get that information for you. And thank you, Chair Randall and Chair Rishel, for your comments. I know I put a lot on staff. And as when 2313 was adopted in 2013, we talked about the evolution of the authority, but keeping the authority small. But what would the authority be and how would it look as we matured? One thing that I think we just didn't think about at that time, doing funding programs biannually. And hopefully everyone is in full support of that because it keeps us competitive with smart scale, if you will. And I want to make sure the region maximizes all funding opportunities. But really, to the staff, I do ask a lot. I try to be as flexible as I can because we're trying to cover regional entities and regional meetings and just standing up a transportation authority. We had an idea of how that would look, but it has always seemed to evolve. So I just, number one, want to thank staff and thank you as the members for the support of your staff that we've had to this date. We'll get that information to you and have it prepared for my next Finance Committee meeting, February 10th. Okay, and we'll have that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Backman. I would also like to request that we receive the economic impact figures as well to show the impact that the NVTA has had. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, I'm going to assume that there's enough input for staff. Mr. Longi, do you have anything further?
Actually, we have a couple of other initiatives that I'd at least like to expose the committee to.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I was cutting you off. I neglected to see that. Thank you.
It was a good transition point. A couple of other initiatives. One that we haven't talked about yet is, and this is item E, section 4, internet capacity upgrade. This is just the mechanics of data moving through a pipeline. We've actually been able to push it off because of the pandemic and work from home. But with or without the new positions, we need to switch from a Cox business cable to fiber optic backbone, and that has a $10,000 mostly one-time cost to it. The other item is website modernization and consolidation. This has a $250,000 price tag to it. And what I'll mention on this is, we have the PIM system and the Nova Gateway, which were well received, and they were built, by a professional outfit, obviously, on a consulting basis. We also, so we have one system, then we have our corporate website, and we have the transaction website. So we've kind of got these three stovepipes. The transaction website was built by website professionals. The corporate website, which we have used all along since even prior to the passage of 2313, but built upon it since then, that is our core, obviously our core internet face. However, it's really only been put together by folks who were not website professionals. And so I'll use this meeting as an example. When we pivoted this meeting, staff had to go to about 6 places on our corporate website to update the meeting change. I had tried, quite frankly, to leverage the transaction website, because it kind of gets a refresh every time we do a transaction upgrade. I tried to leverage getting this work done as part of transaction. The communications subcontractor for that came back and said the price tag is $1 million. That's obviously not in the transaction budget. It's roughly half of the transaction budget, and certainly not something I would try to put through on the authority without being absolutely transparent. Plus, I had a hard time understanding how the work was going to be $1 million. We did go out and talk to a couple of IT firms or website firms who develop and maintain large corporate websites. Got cost estimates that were considerably less, and actually the more we talk to them, the more the price is coming down. So this is, it is a big ask, but obviously the website, whether it's the corporate website or transaction, is how people see us. And we are looking at the things called, and I'm not an expert on this, but things called broken links and stuff like that are coming up, popping up more and more. So we're seeing the symptoms of having outgrown the system. So I would submit that for your consideration on a, I think we can clearly say a not to exceed $250,000 basis. But I'm putting that out there for the committee's consideration. Moving to, and we touched on this as part of the audit discussion, in talking to PB mayors, they believe that they could get us in good shape to be a recipient for federal funds for a $12,000 consulting expense. I know Council Member Snyder has mentioned several times that he wants to make sure that the regional entities can participate in this. From the authority perspective, since we are not currently applying for federal grants, I want to make it very clear that we're proposing this not to compete with jurisdictions and agencies, but looking that there may be a application benefit, and the rules for a lot of this federal transportation money are being written as we speak. But there may be a opportunity for a regional entity to participate with one or more jurisdictions and transit agencies. And we want to be prepared to be able to participate in that, not to compete, but to enhance applications and to be a benefit for the region. That cost, again, the $12,000, I think is indicative of the fact that the audit firm is comfortable with us, they're familiar with us. And again, using the direction you provided earlier, this would be something that we could probably wrap up between July and fall of this year. The next item is also one we've talked about. It's the ongoing duplicate payment audit. We put in 18,500. I won't discuss that any further because I think we've beat that to death. And the last item listed is the next economic impact study at 13,500. And Mayor Rochon, this goes back exactly to what you're saying. We do one of these studies shortly after we do a 2-year update to the 6-year program to capture the amount of money that the authority has allocated towards projects in that cycle. With that, that concludes my discussion on the budget. Looking at next steps, we'll come back with responses to Chairman McKay's questions. Any questions that you submit to us, via email for the February 10th meeting. And when the committee is comfortable moving the budget forward, obviously it'll be presented to the full authority for their consideration, input, and adoption.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Longi. Any other comments, questions, or input for Mr. Longi? Okay. Seeing none and hearing none, we shall move on. In the interest of time, unless, Mr. Longi, unless you want to proceed efficiently through 9, 10, and 11, perhaps we could just take questions. Are there any questions or comments on 9, 10, and 11? Okay, hearing none. Is that okay with you, Mr. Longi?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I will just note that the investment portfolio, if we could just go quickly to page 4, Margaret.
Yeah, certainly, certainly.
And the chart there, Peggy Teal has redesigned this because it was getting too busy. I would just draw the committee's attention to the fact that we are beating our benchmarks substantially. And I credit the strategy that Joe Gilbert brought to us, along with Deb's contribution to being able to quickly respond to opportunities in a rising interest rate environment. I'm still working on the revenue estimates, but I think when we come back with the Regional Revenue Fund revenue estimates, the income from the portfolio will be between 10 and $15 million, substantially up from last year, which obviously was impacted by the
That is excellent. What is the amount that is reinvested every month?
We are reinvesting. We have a target actually to reinvest at least 30 million. And that's actually been the key to the success is we are constantly reinvesting principal from maturities. And we are about 12 to 18 $18 million a month positive on cash flow. So we're in the market to the tune of about $48 million every month.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? No? Chair McKay? No. Okay, thank you. Mr. Longi, any other comments?
I would just wrap up to say that we don't need to go into detail because you don't have anything to worry about on your revenue projections. They're doing very well. And the operating budget is likewise in very good shape. And I'll conclude.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you. NBTA update, Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be brief, I've been trying to keep the full authority abreast of what's going on in Richmond and the bills. I sent out something yesterday on the status of where we were as of yesterday morning. I will be sending out something else tomorrow morning as these committee meetings continue to happen and take shape. The one thing I will note, because we have the two bills that directly reference MBTA, and that's the Keene bill and then the Servo bill. Ms. Boehner has spoken with Delegate Keene. We sent him a letter noting how much money the town of Vienna has actually received for sidewalks, either through their 30% CMAQ monies, the TAP programs. There was another 7.2 million that they received for sidewalks. So they are doing relatively well. And of course, they can apply to the authority directly. Delegate Keene said that that was very helpful. It was good to know and have that information. Now, regarding Senator Servo's bill, we're still having conversations. His latest proposal, it does require an increase in CNI, and I shouldn't say require because that would be voluntary on the localities. I did inform him that we have 3 localities that have the CNI currently at 12.5 cents. The other localities are doing the equivalent, and this is to meet the provisions of HB 2313. If that bill passes, number one, I think there are some concerns about trying to use local monies to match federal funding programs. Again, as Mr. Longi had noted, the authority, we are not a designated recipient of federal funds at this time. We do not control the TAP program. And there are some questions about the legalities of trying to put a percentage on the localities on how much that they can apply to for a federal funding program. So we're trying to convey the messaging regarding these situations. The last thing I would note is we are trying to meet, and it's not only NOVA, we're bringing in Hampton Roads, the Virginia Transit Association, to discuss some of the gas tax suspension bills and what that would mean, and really having all of us speaking from with one voice, if you will, or with, you know, some of the same talking points. So we hopefully will have that meeting scheduled next week. And again, it's for Northern Virginia. Hampton Roads is involved. We have VRE, PRTC, MVTC, VTA. I know it's a lot of acronyms, but we are trying to have speak in unison really about what that would mean for us. And Madam Chair, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. When we begin to have our meetings prior to the full authority meeting, I would request that if staff sees that we have a very large agenda, that we could perhaps add an extra half hour to the length of the meeting. Instead of starting 1 hour, perhaps start an hour and a half. And that would all depend upon the size of the agenda. But thank you. And our sincere thanks again to staff for all your hard work. We deeply appreciate it. Is there anything else that needs to come before the committee? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.